Hello and welcome to Maester Monthly, your favorite pseudo-monthly podcast hosted by the moderators of the Song of Ice and Fire subreddit. Before we begin, this podcast is spoilers extended, which means material from the Winds of Winter and Game of Thrones TV show is fair game. You have been warned. My name is Matt, also known as JoeMagician.
And my name is Eliana, also known as Glass Table Girl.
And my name is Isabel, also known as MightyIsobel.
And on this episode, we'll be talking about the upcoming Fire and Blood book coming out in just a few days, probably at this point. Yeah, just a few days.
In just hours.
Hours away. we think. Well,
probably.
Who knows?
Everything is technically hours away, you know?
Wow. That is a perspective.
Whoa.
Everything is technically seconds away. It's just how many.
You are blowing my mind. So that means the Winds of Winter is only hours away.
Yes, the Winds of Winter is only hours away.
No, stop.
How many? Well, I mean, it's going to be released at the same time as Fire and Blood. I mean, we all know it, so that'll be a cool day tomorrow. When,
yeah, for
sure.
We
get both of them at the same time and the fandom explodes. But anyway, let's start with our introduction question. Which character in Fire and Blood are you the most excited to learn about? Eliana, go.
Okay. Unexpectedly, I'm going to say Aegon the Third.
Whoa.
Because we know so little about him, right? I think that we know that he was morose, he had like a traumatic childhood, obviously, and we learn a lot about how Aegon the Third came to be in power and like all the things around him, but who is Aegon the Third really? And we still might never find out. Like, the book is going to be written from the quote-unquote perspective of a Maester years after Aegon III's rule, so it could still be very much not who he was and shrouded in lots of rumors, etc. But Aegon III is the one that I'm going to say.
That's a hot take. I don't think anybody saw the Dragonbane coming as the answer to that question. But yeah, I mean, I would say he's one of the Targaryen kings I know the least about. He's just kind of like the emo one, as far as...
He's a poor, sad boy, and he needs a hug.
That's true. And his mom, he can't get it from his mom because she was eaten by a dragon.
Exactly.
Rip Aegon and Rhaenyra. That's good. Good answer, Eliana. Isabel, what are you looking forward to the most?
I am looking forward to learning about Grand Maester Orwyle, who is... He's one of the historians that Gildane's historical account of the Targaryens is based on. He was aligned with the Greens during the Dance of the Dragons, and bad things happened to him, and he ended up in jail, in prison. And in a So Spake Martin from 2015, we are told that he sat in a prison cell uncertain if he was going to end up executed or not, and wanting to lay down his side of the story to try and paint himself in the best possible light. And so Elio Garcia says that it's going to be one of the many highlights of Fire and Blood. And I think the whole idea of one of these historians with his axe to grind and his agenda that's going to be a big fun reveal, and it's going to bring a lot to the universe.
Why am I not surprised your answer is a Maester who's a historian?
It's about right.
That came out of nowhere.
Always want to be surprising.
Always surprising about history. And Maurice Drouin and his Yu-Gi-Oh! Interest.
Yes, that too.
So for mine, I don't think this can be surprising to anybody. My character I'm most excited to learn about is Septon Barth.
Nice.
Because Septon Barth is right about everything, it appears, and a large part of Targaryen history after his death appears to have been suppressing everything that he knew and everything that he wrote, to the point that his books are scattered all over Westeros. And I'm especially excited to figure out the nature of the three heads of the dragon, basically, of Jaehaerys, Alysanne, and Barth, and where he fits in, because we've gotten a taste of Alysanne and Jaehaerys already and how they fit together. But where does Barth fit into that power structure?
Are you telling me that they were having threesomes with Barth?
I'm not saying no, but I am... No. No, I'm talking about as the three main forces ruling the kingdom while Jaehaerys was on the throne. It appears there was a strong relationship of power between the three of them.
But wait, Septas and Septons are celibate, aren't they?
Well, you never know.
Maybe we'll find out.
Maesters are supposed to be celibate. But yeah, especially with Barth's knowledge of the Children of the Forest, he figures out his journey to Castle Black, his interest in the dragons, all this other really cool information that really hits my sweet spot in A Song of Ice and Fire. So definitely Barth.
Barth's a good one.
I am also excited about anything we find out about Barth.
Especially where he's from.
Yeah.
Some people think he's from the north, which is interesting.
Huh.
Some people think he's from White Harbor.
And just think, by the time our listeners hear this conversation, they may know the answer.
They may. It may be an excerpt as we're talking, coming out in some random newspaper around the world.
Hello, reader of the future.
If you've already heard the answer, where Barth is from, please put it in the comments so we can look like fools. Thank you very much.
In our defense, we are just lowly beings from the past.
Hours in the past.
Hours, seconds in the past.
So speaking of hours and seconds, let's talk about some of the reviews and comments we got since the last episode came out.
I will read aloud a comment by Chelsea B. Mays from iTunes. Chelsea B. Mays says, I'm so angry. I didn't find this podcast sooner. This has saved me at work, and I'm going to be devastated when I run out of episodes to binge. Such wonderful and intelligent discussions. Wow, is that really how we come off?
Yeah, apparently.
I'm obsessed with Aswath, but unfortunately, I have 0 friends who share the same passion. Therefore, this is the most fun I've had listening to a podcast in a while.
Oh.
That sounds more on brand.
Yeah. There it is. I like how Chelsea put in almost like directions and emphasis so that Eliana could act it out just so perfectly, like reading lines.
I'm just glad I've saved someone at work, you know? Chelsea B. Mays is currently employed, and it's really thanks to us.
Wow.
You're welcome, Chelsea B. Mays.
It's another mind blow in this episode.
We're the podcast that keeps on giving. Your paycheck, that's us. That's on me.
An intelligent, wonderful discussion. Ooh. I'm not sure about that one, but yeah, definitely keeping you employed.
That's a high bar, you guys. We've got a ways to go.
I want to be the podcaster that Chelsea B. Mays thinks I am.
I think you are.
Yeah.
Next one from Adriana from YouTube. Another pleasant morning surprise. I always like these kind of comments just because it's like, with our pseudo-monthly style, we kind of sneak up on people, and it's like a wonderful surprise when our podcast shows up in their feed. And there are some that are like that for me in my with the podcasts I listen to. I'm like, yes, this randomly showed up today. So, Adriana, I feel you on a deep level with that comment. I enjoy when my morning is saved by a good episode of a podcast.
Yeah, me too. That's very relatable.
I just think it's funny because on one hand it speaks to our whimsical nature, right? That when we come out.
That's a way of saying it.
But also, I guess in theory we could tell people when a new episode is on the way, but we could also just let it be a pleasant morning surprise.
For Adriana, yeah.
Yeah, we're doing it for Adriana, to be honest.
We have a lot to live up to from these last 2 comments.
I know.
We're saving mornings and jobs.
Yeah, and the next comment
Oof.
really sets the bar high.
Really sets it high.
This is from Thunderclap, and it's, wow, Walda is amazing, well-versed in heraldry, well-traveled, and was that Monty Python reference as for dolphins right out? And I think that was a Monty Python reference.
Probably.
Yeah,
That's her
knowing
bag.
Walda, yes.
And yes, Walda is amazing.
Yes.
She crushed that episode.
That is 100% agree on that.
Just so people know, that was the previous episode 15 /cast, I think it was titled, with Isabel, Walda, and Bookshelf, and they really just crushed it. I was listening to it back afterwards, and Walda's discussion of heraldry was indeed amazing. If you haven't listened, go back and make sure you do.
Not only was it amazing, if you haven't listened to it, it's very informative about how heraldry actually worked in the real world. And turns out Aswath has it all wrong. But it's very informative, and you should take a listen to it because she's great. She was supposed to join us tonight, but unfortunately we had technical issues. So yes, also something else that we definitely have to live up to, making up for her absence on tonight's cast.
It's a lot of pressure on this episode.
No.
We should depressure it a little bit.
Go get some fire and blood. Set some things on fire. / some
Where are you
scared.
going with this one?
No.
I just
No.
spent the week bleeding, so
What if we don't?
I don't need to bleed anymore.
That's a insight into Eliana's personal life that I don't think any of us saw coming, but that's there. That's good. The main topic this week, we do not have the subreddit highlights in the way we're used to. We did a different thing. Our own MightyIsobel, here with us today, was leading a whole bunch of threads on the different chapters and topic coming out in Fire and Blood. And for us today, she has curated them down to a finely honed list of only the best things that the fandom is looking forward to in Fire and Blood. So, Isabel, take it away.
Thanks, Matt. Like Matt said, I put up a bunch of threads for the last couple of months about the various characters and themes that we're expecting to see in Fire and Blood. And I went and found threads that had been posted since the beginning of the subreddit and linked those up so that you could see what people had been saying for the last 6 years about Viserys I or about Visenya. And there was some good discussion in the comments where people brought up new theories and updated these topics. And also, I'm hoping that if you've got the book in front of you and you were kind of wondering where you'd seen a theory before, I'm hoping maybe those threads will be a way for you to sort of shortcut to finding that old theory post that you remember seeing somewhere. And I might have been able to find it and link it up, or it might have gotten talked about in the comments so that you can go find it and see whether we were right when we were talking about something 3 years ago and whether the book, confirms something for us or debunks something or raises new questions we didn't even think of. So this finely honed, curated list is just a couple of interesting topics that I and the other mods are excited about finding out about when we have the books in our hands, the books that you probably have in your hand right now. So
It's true. It's one of the more exciting times in the Song of Ice and Fire fandom, the culling of theories that's about to happen. So many people are about to scream out as all their theories go up in Fire and Blood. Huh? See what I did there?
Oh, that's what it's called.
But only death can pay for life, so I feel like as many theories die out with all the other information that's going to come in from Fire and Blood, we're going to see the birth of a whole new generation of theories.
That's really deep.
I think that's exactly right.
You're on a roll this episode. You're like blowing minds left and right.
I'm going to say the reason why is because I am drinking the Johnny White Walker scotch.
Ooh.
Do you have to say it with that voice when you say the name?
I do. Someone said to me recently, who was it? I think M. Toodles sent me a DM recently. It was like, I appreciate how you're always drinking on your Maester podcast. It's like, shit, is that what people think about me?
I mean, like, one thing they think about you. Anyway, so let's go to the first one. I think
I am really excited about this one. This is a theory about Dragonstone that Mithras Stoneborn brought up in the Dragonstone Let's Discuss thread. And they said, what if there's magically hidden sections in the Castle of Dragonstone? These sections could only be accessed by people with Targaryen blood doing specific rites. This would explain why Loras can't find anything at Dragonstone. And the idea that Dragonstone is a soft place with like magical portals in it, or it's bigger on the inside, I think that's a very cool idea. When I saw the table of contents for Fire and Blood, I gave up on some of my hopes of getting lots of really cool magic stuff about Dragonstone. But the idea that there are soft places on Westeros and on Planetos, and that Dragonstone could be one of them, would be just very cool.
Yeah, it just kind of makes me think of Diagon Alley.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's exactly like what this idea is, and I think that there is merit in the idea that the Black Gate exists.
Yeah.
Well, I have a few things to say about this. First of all, I love the idea that Dragonstone's a TARDIS.
Yes.
That would make me so happy. if it was just like a Type 40 something TARDIS just sitting there. But anyway,
wow.
Well, Dragonstone itself, just like geologically, it's a volcanic hotspot, so it is just sort of symbolically a meeting of the two worlds, the upper world and the underworld kind of thing. Like a hell on earth kind of place. That makes a lot of sense. And there's also just all the obsidian and the talk that there's dragon eggs everywhere, but nobody can find these things. Like, I believe at some point Stannis said that they basically combed it looking for dragon eggs and have found nothing his entire time he was there. So it's a cool idea, especially with just how amazing the Valyrians were with all the things they can make, like with the demon roads that are even centuries later still like arrows straight, nothing's happening to them, or they're the amazing pictures that we get from Valyria. If there's something like that hidden in Dragonstone, like just sort of the idea of like, what does it look like maybe from like a dragon's eyes, or what does it look like from like a true Targaryen's eyes? That's kind of a cool idea.
Oh, yeah. Very cool. Like an altered perception.
Yeah.
This kind of situation at the location. I mean, it wouldn't even have to be Dragonstone itself. Like, it could be, there's all kinds of places that could be time-space rifty thing happening that we might find out about in the book.
That's true.
Yeah. I think the one thing that I have qualms with or think is different is that the Black Gate doesn't respond to the idea of someone's blood so much as it does an intent, right? It responds to someone saying a vow, and I think that's very different from the idea that only people of certain blood have access to certain things, because I think that the story, this is a personal harp of mine, right? Like, I think that the story does lead us to think that yes, certain bloodlines or whatever are magical, but there is the extent to which, like, yeah, that veers a little close to ideas that could justify eugenics, which is what the Targaryens were doing.
True.
And I think that the story should be criticizing ideas that, like, certain bloodlines confer power. And it already does, to an extent, in a thematic way, of the idea that being born to X family means that you are afforded social power. And I'm like, do we really need to give them magical power on top of that?
Yeah.
I guess according to George.
That's a very good point, Eliana.
And they already, I mean, the story does do that with, like, things like dragons and wolves, right? But the wolves are certainly a boon, but the dragons don't necessarily make life easier. In many ways, the dragons are a complicating factor, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. People that acquire dragons all of a sudden want to become conquerors who probably wouldn't before. That kind of thing.
More curse than blessing.
Yeah.
Like how people can't resist the draw of power. I don't know, maybe in a Black Gate way, maybe there's much like the story of Varys and his unfortunate eunuching, where they threw that into the fire and the fire answered back. Maybe there's something like that in Dragonstone. Like maybe you can talk to the volcano or something like that.
Ooh.
Something weird like that.
It's interesting. Yeah. I'm fine with it being, like, a rite, you know, like,
Yeah.
Varys has committed, I don't know, some blood thing, and, like, he's totally the kind of person who's down to do that, as shown by the little birds.
Mm.
And it was done to him. Like, that's the world he's in. And I like, and Eliana, I also like the idea of gates or portals opening on an oath, right?
Yeah.
Like the ritual side of it, or making a commitment, or making
A statement of intent.
a solemn commitment.
Or something, yeah.
Yeah, that.
They're magic words. Like, it's an open sesame.
Yes, exactly. Or like pulling the right book in the Addams Family library in order to
Aw.
get to the vault.
The Addams Family!
I love the Addams Family. One thing that I also really like about this post, and it's sort of a thematic thing, it's that Dragonstone, as we know it in A Song of Ice and Fire, it is dreary and Stannis hates it. So you kind of think of it the same way. But it was the seat of Aegon the Conqueror for most of his reign. And I think I think only Maegor really left permanently for King's Landing. And it was the seat of power for the next in line for the throne for generations.
And the Targaryens had been there 130 years before the conquest.
Yeah.
It was the splendiferous seat.
It would be cool if there was a way that was true in a way that Stannis can't see, basically.
Yeah.
Maybe part of why he can't see it is just because he thinks that it was given to him out of spite from Robert. And honestly, actually, a lot of the art of Dragonstone presents it as dreary, but that's something that I liked that the show did in the way that they presented Dragonstone. Like, for Stannis, he felt like it was a prison almost in some ways, I think.
Yeah.
He never used those words, but he felt like it was a consolation. But when Daenerys comes back in season 7, like, Dragonstone doesn't look sad. It is lit. And not like in the cool, like, hip, young slang way.
Hashtag lit.
Like, it is literally full of light. We see it in the sun, and, like, she inhabits it, and she embraces it as her home and invites people in, and then we see so much sunlight throughout Dragonstone as opposed to when Stannis was there.
True. That's a great point. So let's move on to the next one. It is by user Layrit, was Visenya the brains of the conquest? And this is from one of Isabel's fine threads. Layrit said, from reading The World of Ice and Fire, it could be deduced with reasonable ease that Aegon was more of a figurehead than a king. The brains of the whole conquest was Visenya. The only reason we talk of Aegon's conquest and not Visenya's conquest is because the society of the time was too patriarchal, and it is dangerous to enforce a great change on the lands you conquer. This is an excellent thing, and something I'm looking forward to especially. And it's sort of a running theme that we've seen from the excerpt so far, that the Targaryen women are much more important to their monarchy than you would probably guess from the way the histories are written. Like, children could name off the names of all the kings and probably not most of the queens. Very few of the queens are even named or get titles. But as we learn about characters like Visenya, Alysanne, and more, it's very clear they had huge parts to play in the political engine that the Targaryens ruled for a couple centuries. And especially from Sons of the Dragon. I mean, during our unfortunate live stream where things got a little fire and bloody.
I thought that was great.
It was towards the end. It got a little off the rails, but that was a main thing I talked about in particular, that I thought Visenya came away as the most powerful and important character in a story, in a short excerpt that was ostensibly supposed to be about Aenys and Maegor. I'm really looking forward to that kind of theme running through it.
I think we're very likely to see that. And just looking at, like, as I've been setting up the threads, I've been linking back to the World of Ice and Fire discussion threads, to the ones that are relevant to the new threads I'm posting. And then we got the chapter list for Fire and Blood, and you can actually compare the section and chapter list from World of Ice and Fire to the chapter list of Fire and Blood. And in World of Ice and Fire, it's just the list of the names of kings, and it ends up looking like a story about, like, a line of guys who did stuff, a line of great men or ungreat men or whatever. And with the Fire and Blood chapter list, you get a lot more. You get a lot more about the complicated stories around these. You know, there's this throne that somebody sits on, but there's all these other things going on. There's a time of testing. There's Jaehaerys and Alysanne. There's a bunch of sections about the dying of the dragons, about the dance of the dragons, and the different people in that. And it's just it's a different way of framing the story we're going to get than what we've had since World of Ice and Fire came out with its list of kings.
Yeah, for sure. And going back to what Matt was saying about Sons of the Dragon turns out it was kind of about Aenys and Maegor.
Like, kinda.
Kinda. It was really about all of the women.
Yeah.
And since this comment is about Visenya, I think there's merit to it because we see that Visenya was in many ways the backbone when Aegon died. And, Rhaenys died, but, like, the kingdom kept going. And I think that maybe the part of that has to do with Visenya being that by Aegon to support him and / or maybe rule in his stead or be that equal ruler next to him, but just isn't written down. We see that she and Rhaenys were ruling in the stead of Aegon when that excerpt came out recently. And also, when Visenya died in Sons of the Dragon, everything started going to shit for Maegor.
Yeah.
And I think that's because Visenya held it all together.
Yeah.
It really is a credit to her that I think ostensibly the worst Targaryen king, his reign was held together just because she was still around. And actually, it's an odd way that's being pushed forward in Fire and Blood, is that you can kind of see the importance of the women in the political structures by, like, the more they're described as, like, witches. It's very strange, but Visenya is described as, like, almost like a Halloween style witch near the end. She's, like, making potions and casting spells and curses and things like that. But when you look at what she's actually doing, it's really just an odd recognition of her political power that the men don't know how to deal with.
That's definitely true, and it's also, you can even start seeing that reflected in the current A Song of Ice and Fire storyline, where you see that the Windblown are talking about all these rumors about Daenerys and framing her as, I'm not going to remember, the one who would bathe in the blood right? Of
Oh,
virgins, etc. And
oh, Mad Donnell lost them.
no,
But there's a
in
real
yeah,
character.
in our real world,
Oh,
there's
let
a
me look her up.
legend
Oh,
about that.
yeah.
The Bloody Baron. Bloody Baroness?
It always comes back to blood, doesn't it?
Oh, here we go. The Countess, Elizabeth Bathory.
Yes, Elizabeth Bathory, and the way that Daenerys, as she rises in power, more of, as you said, this very witchy description is used to describe her. So in the chapter of the Windblown, Quentin says, the more Quentin heard of Daenerys Targaryen, the more he feared that meeting the Yunkai claimed that she fed her dragons on human flesh and bathed in the blood of virgins to keep her skin smooth and supple. And then later on, they talk about her promiscuity and that she rode with the Dothraki and grew accustomed to being fucked by stallions, so now no man can fill her. And then later on, they say that she killed her call to make herself Khaleesi. She practices blood sacrifices, lies as easily as she breathes, turns against her own on a whim. She's broken truces, tortured envoys. Her father was mad too. It runs in the blood. So it's similar.
That's totally Elizabeth Bathory.
Whereas she's doing nothing different from Aegon, or Aegon the First, but he's the dragon or the conqueror, and Visenya's a moldy old witch casting spells, and Dany's bathing in virgin blood. It's very emblematic of the way the patriarchal structure of Westeros reacts to these kind of powerful women.
Yes, it is. Hiss with me, sisters and brothers.
So I'm going to throw it out there. Tiana the Tower.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
Actual witch.
Probably actually doing witchcraft. Actually, really though.
But how much? Like, even like Melisandre, a lot of her witchcrafty stuff is kind of faked.
But there was magic.
Where she like throws powders and weird other stuff to make people think she's witchier than maybe she really is, that kind of thing.
I think there's an aspect of that to Tiana. I think there's also, there was magic in the world at that time.
Yeah, she was a witch.
There's both.
Probably.
I mean, you can be a weak witch. You still a witch, but you're just you're like level 1 instead of level 10.
Who's a level 10 witch in A Song of Ice and Fire?
The Night Queen.
Actually, great answer.
Book 1, Game of Thrones, Cersei Lannister is a witch. This is an entirely other thing, but
Now she does get the same kind of descriptions Dany gets, although some of it's deserved with Cersei.
She's some Snow Queen language and
Yes.
imagery. The Ice Queen. We women. So we're so cold-hearted.
Very cold. Speaking of cold women, Eliana, why don't you do the next one, which has nothing to do with cold women?
Yeah. Speaking of Visenya and Rhaenys and how they're described, and I think the same thread, maybe, of Fire and Blood, is coming that you posted, MightyIsobel. You have some descriptions, right, of Visenya and Rhaenys, and one of them is from a So Speak Martin. Like, Visenya is a year or two older than Aegon, Rhaenys is a year or two younger, and, like, they're described as they have silver gold hair, but theirs is worn long. Visenya often braided her hair or bound it up in rings, while Rhaenys wore hers loose and flowing, and then later on they're like, Visenya is both stern and sensual, more voluptuous than her sister, more passionate, but with a dark and unforgiving side. Rhaenys, the youngest of the three, is slender and graceful, playful, with a mischievous aspect to her personality that Visenya lacks. Rhaenys is the flirt, Visenya the seductress. And then, like,
oh my.
I love this comment from Oilbird, spelled with a 0 to spell the word oil.
Zoilbird.
Yes, Zoilbird. Says, it's funny how these Visenya and Rhaenys descriptions sound like bog standard wish fulfillment RPG character background fluff out of control. And then they put in a quotation of what this would sound like. These are my waifu OC, do not steal.
I think that's a surprisingly insightful joke. I mean, they're basically like Final Fantasy characters.
Kinda.
Yeah.
Like if Cloud is Aegon.
I like the response comment to it too by Anaconosis, which is for real. Women don't describe themselves this way. I give those descriptions 5 out of 5 pink masks.
That's the new rating scale.
So well done, Oilbird. We think you're onto something there.
They really are, though. Theoretically,
Mhm.
his waifu OC is just the waifus of Aegon.
It's true. Do we even Like, in your head, do you even have a conception of what Aegon looked like?
Yeah, he's real hot.
Is he? Do you mean the art from Magali of the
Yeah,
dragon?
there's the one with like all three of them looking off in the distance and their hair blowing. You know the one. They're facing off to the left, all the way on the right side of the picture. I'm like,
Yeah.
that one's cool. He has a strong jaw.
Oh, I don't know. He has a beard. Who knows?
When he gets older, a lot older, he looks like Ted Danson, apparently.
So is Maegor, weirdly.
According to A World of Ice and Fire.
Yeah.
They look like Ted Danson. Everyone, I say this every time, but I'm never going to let it go. Turn to the Dornish section of The World of Ice and Fire and the scene in which Aegon is reading the letter about Rhaenys' death. He looks like Ted Danson. No one will convince me otherwise.
Is Aegon the one who looks like Chris Hemsworth?
No, that's Rhaegar.
That's that's Rhaegar. That guy.
Yeah.
Generic Targaryen guy.
It depends on the king. We get a lot of, I think, physical description, right, of Baelor Breakspear.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we do have Viserys. I think we get quite a bit of Viserys, if I'm not mistaken.
Viserys the First?
No, like our Viserys in the storyline. I could be wrong.
Shithead Viserys. Well, other shithead Viserys.
And as we saw in the excerpt that was released this week, there's a lot about Visenya and Rhaenys. Well, I don't know if it's a lot because it was an excerpt, so I don't know what's going to actually come out. But there was information about Visenya and Rhaenys actually ruling the Seven Kingdoms, and not just if they are dark and sensual and passionate.
Draw them like this.
Which should be fair. Like, maybe he did for Aegon and the other ones because there's a pretty consistent look.
Yeah.
Kinda. I wonder if there was like... I'm gonna make another Final Fantasy reference. I wonder if there was like... Do you remember the part from Final Fantasy VII where Cloud has to like pick which girl he's gonna take on the date in the casino? Well, basically, you had to pick which girl you were gonna take on a date in the casino, and then it ended up being a crazy love triangle. I'm hoping that's what it was like for Aegon and his sisters. Just like Final Fantasy bad plot drama.
I mean, Sephiroth is basically looks like a Targaryen.
This is true. He may as well be. He even gets the one wing angel. And sometimes the Targaryens have wings. For our next one...
Oh, can I talk about this next one?
Yes, Isabel, you can talk about this really insightful, well-written post.
It is a very interesting theory that I am really excited about going through Fire and Blood looking for more evidence for. And the title of the thread is Aegon's Epic Loot, and it's by some joker named JoeMagician. Oh!
It's me!
Oh, sorry!
Oh my god.
Oh, sorry, Matt.
Oh.
What I really like about this theory, which is a theory that Phaegon in our series is going to be imbued with the trappings of the Targaryen dynasty of old, with their regalia. And I'm sorry, Matt, you should talk about this, but I think it's such a cool theory.
Okay. So, this theory is, I was thinking quite a lot at the time, because there's a sister post to this about how Cersei's going to see Rhaegar everywhere, and then this sort of came out of that, or I'm not sure. One of them came out of the other. But the basic idea is that in this kind of society, and especially in Targaryen history, having the right icons of power were sometimes more important than maybe being the right person. Like Maegor made the claim that because he has Balerion and Blackfire, therefore he should be king over Aenys, even though Aenys is the rightful king by I think Aegon's succession or whatever. So this is much more of a theory post than an analysis, but I talk about how it's almost for certain that Illyrio somehow acquired the sword Blackfire from a cut line about him speaking Valyrian, I think. And also the crown of Aegon the Conqueror has gone missing, but it went missing in Dorne because he was ambushed and the crown was never returned. So if there's going to be some kind of marriage pact between Aryan and Phaegon, the gift of the Conqueror's crown would be an amazing way to seal it, and something that Varys and Phaegon would be extremely interested in acquiring. And then there's actually the fact that nobody knows what happened to Rhaegar's armor. After he died, his body was incinerated, as most Targaryens are, but you'd expect, with how much hate Robert Baratheon has for Rhaegar, that his armor would be displayed somewhere so he can look at it, so he can remember killing Rhaegar, and he doesn't have it. So it's out there somewhere. And we actually see Fagon's armor is very, very reminiscent of Rhaegar. And that's sort of Varys's pitch to Westeros, that this is Rhaegar come again, even though he probably really isn't.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a lot of, as you
Cool.
say, it's trappings of power.
It's trappings of power, and it's called out explicitly in Renly's ghost charge, basically, on King's Landing, where Garland Tyrell wore Renly's armor, and it inspired them to win, even though it was not actually, obviously, Renly. But just the mere fact that the symbol showed up was enough to rally, and that's sort of what Varys is probably counting on, with all the ways he is desperately trying to throw Targaryen trappings on Aegon.
Yeah, there's definitely, I think, a lot of that weaving of that narrative of him being the true heir. A really good essay on this, I would say, is by something like a lawyer over in the Wars and Politics of Ice and Fire blog called The Spider and the Dragon, and it talks about not like the specific symbols, but that idea of how Varys is creating this sort of political narrative around Aegon.
And I really like this theory because of how it hooks into a theme that George is obviously very interested in, with connecting spectacle and display to power, right? I mean, Cersei is one of our main windows on that, but it comes up over and over again. And the idea that Varys and Illyrio are competent enough political actors and information brokers, up to all kinds of shenanigans anyway, the idea that they could bring all this together to prop up their perfect prince, I think it fits a lot of the themes, whether or not it comes to pass as actual canon. It is a rich speculation.
For sure.
And I wanted to throw over to another thread that a more recent thread that picks up some of this idea, which is by Schmed Stark, and it's The Secret of Square Cut Rubies. And he picks up a similar idea where he walks through the times we see red rubies in the books, and the red ruby is a sign of deception. There's one on Rattleshirt's wrist. There's one on Stannis's fake Lightbringer, and there's there's big red square cut rubies in Aegon the First's crown, right? So if that crown ended up on Fagon, it would be that red ruby sign again of a glamour, of something fake, of a mummer's dragon.
That's a very good insight from Schmed Stark. They're actually, yeah, they got the top comment on my post too, so I think they went from mine to making their own and expanded it in a very interesting way. It's such a common theme in these Targaryen family conflicts that it's almost always the one that looks the part versus the one that actually has the part.
Yeah.
Like Daeron and Daemon Blackfire. Like there's this quote here from the Sworn Swords. Sir Eustace says, Daeron was spindly and round of shoulder, with a little belly that wobbled when he walked. Daemon stood straight and proud, and his stomach was flat and hard as an oaken shield. And he could fight. With an axe or lance or flail, he was as good as any knight I ever saw. With a sword, he was the warrior himself. When Prince Daemon had Blackfire in his hand, there was not a man to equal him. Not Ulrich Dane with Dawn, no, nor even the Dragon Knight with Dark Sister. And that's really what we're talking about. The person that most resembles the perfect Targaryen, and how that seems to rally quite a lot of supporters. That's even really the argument behind the Dance of the Dragons, where Rhaenyra is declared the heir, and then basically the Greens argument is like, but she can't be because Aegon's better.
Yeah. And how the idea of the perfect Targaryen is constructed. And it's constructed in each generation with whatever materials you've got lying around, slap it on there and make yourself a monarch.
Also, speaking of what we were talking about earlier in terms of physical descriptions of Targaryen men, just want to point out, this is a very specific, in my opinion, description that Daemon Blackfire had a stomach like an oaken shield.
So Eustace had a crush a little bit, eh?
I don't know if he had a crush, but like that's a specific descriptor. You know, like that's something that you definitely use to characterize sexy men.
Yes.
So maybe George is a little more equal than we were saying.
You know what? Good point, Eliana. I was maybe unfair.
You didn't say washboard, though.
No, although this came up with my discussion with Indie Geek when we were talking about Ned and Robert. And this from the last episode of Maester Monthly, where you guys were talking about my joke about Ned and the Magic Pixie Dream Girl. The descriptions Ned has of Robert are very similar to this, loving of the physical form of a young man from an unlikely source.
You know, as I say in The Good Place, it's 2018. Why can't they be bi, you know? Why aren't more guys bi? It's 2018.
What year is it in Westeros when the story
2018. It's 2018.
It's
2018 in Westeros. All right.
2018.
2018 in Westeros.
That's canon.
That's canon right there.
This is not in the medieval era, but before Victorian ideas of sexuality came along, I'm going to throw out there, I think more guys might have been bi.
Yeah.
Sexuality was a little differently defined. Anyway.
If you read any Shakespeare at all, yeah.
Yeah, Shakespeare, the Fair Youth sonnets, y'all.
Yeah. Wow.
Or Achilles and Patroclus. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the next one. Isabel, I think you actually have this one again. You're on a roll tonight.
I'm on a Fire and Blood, let's discuss roll. So this is a theme that I was seeing in the various threads, and it's about the sources that the Maesters and the Septons who are writing these histories are drawing on. They're always talking about Septon Barth, and they're always talking about Mushroom. Like the Maesters are always casting aspersions on Septon Barth and on Mushroom, but then there's this kind of received wisdom in the fandom that, well, Septon Barth is usually right, you know, he's usually right about how dragons work, and he's usually right about the magic stuff. And with Mushroom, there's also, you know, he's Mushroom actually tends to know what's going on behind the doors in the Red Keep, even if we don't really want to know. He tends to know, and he seems like he's ready to tell us. But, you know, and he has his agenda, and I'm really excited about learning more about Barth and Mushrooms, like where they're actually coming from and what they actually know anything about, and where you have to take their words with a grain of salt, or maybe where you need the Maesters are being too salty about them, and we should trust them over the Maesters.
Yeah, I think that this ties into something that I've been seeing as I've been rereading Sansa chapters. And Sir Dantos, as you all know, goes from being a knight and then is relegated to becoming a fool, and therefore ends up spending a lot of time with Moonboy. And Dantos tells Sansa, he's like, everyone's just telling me everything. Like, everyone's just doing shit in front of me. And he's also like,
I'd forgotten
dude,
about that.
Moonboy knows so much stuff. He's like, Moonboy's like always talking about like these things, or I don't know if he was saying that Moonboy was talking about things, but like he thinks that Moonboy might be a spy, and it's because Mushroom, I don't know if people expected him to go out there and be the unidentified and later identified TMZ source of Westeros, but people were willing to, I think, be vulnerable in front of their fools.
Yeah.
It's true. In those courts where everybody's a threat and everybody's jockeying for power around you, I mean, so I guess you just gotta let things out sometimes, and maybe these fools were like stand-ins for like pseudo-therapists or something. It's like, finally, I could get this off my chest to somebody that won't say anything. It's like, well, until Mushroom, who apparently told everything to the Maesters.
Yeah. I mean, Mushroom is a performer, right? How much of it is performance and him being this comedian, being a little salacious? How much of it is truth? What is your opinion, Isabel?
I'm taking the approach of I'm looking forward to finding out more. Well, I don't think we're going to get like a solid answer. We're going to come away going, oh, wow, Mushroom always tells the truth. I think that George is interested in playing with, you know, how much of the legend will you believe if I print it?
That is a favorite game of his. A lot of times, the characters that know the most in A Song of Ice and Fire are the ones with the most question marks about them. I think just sort of like a general theme. Like, Old Nan is a perfect example of this, where
exactly
she's just like, oh, she's telling scary stories to Bran, but then as we learn more and more, it's like, was she wrong about everything? I think she just got all the history right. How did this happen?
She's the one who's right about everything.
Her and Barth and maybe Mushroom, who knows? It's an interesting sort of meta commentary on history that George is making, where like you usually have to decide in real historical works like who to believe based on like doing research, but because it's an author making it up, it
Yeah.
sort of adds another layer of like, is he just messing with us?
And like you're invited to believe what you want to believe.
This is actually something that our fellow mod Hamfast brought up the other day, and he was talking about the Kingkiller Chronicles and like the War of the Librarians.
Yeah.
Just a little background. It's a plot in that various factions of knowledge basically fight against each other to get the right narrative. And you can see that even in like these extraneous works that George is producing, that they don't even agree with each other, and he's writing them. Our next highlight from the threads is from Let's Discuss the Magic of Dragons, and user jmsturm proposes a theory I don't think I've ever seen before, and it's an intriguing one, talking about that perhaps each kind of dragon or each like family of dragon was tied specifically through maybe some kind of blood magic to the 40 families of the Freehold. Because the Targaryen dragons seem to be relatively loyal to sticking with them, with maybe the exception of Nettles. Although it's, who knows, maybe she actually has a dragon seed, maybe she really just bribed them with sheep. It could go either way on that one. But in particular, there's 3 dragons that were very, very hard to tame, and one of them that never was. There was Cannibal, Sheep Stealer, and Grey Ghost. They lived on Dragonstone, and they didn't obey anybody. They would kill other dragons when they showed up. They were like, these were the wild dragons of the world, and it's something that doesn't really get thought of a lot because they're usually seen as like tools, like Balerion, the tool of the Conqueror who used to bring Westeros to its knees and burn the Volantene fleet. And then there's just these 3 dragons just like screwing off like Smog, just being like, I don't have to listen to you humans. And it's kind of an interesting idea that he's pulling into it, like maybe these dragons are the descendants of dragons that escaped the doom, and how that bloodline magic stuff might have worked. I think it's an interesting theory, at least.
I mean, it goes back to a theme we were talking about earlier in the episode about if bloodlines open portals, what if it's oaths instead? And there's that here. Like, it's really appealing, the idea that dragon riding is something that more than just Targaryen lineage people can get into. But another thing that's very interesting about this theory is that Fire and Blood is going to give us a lot more information about individual dragons and individual Targaryens and their relationships. We might know a lot more about how this might work already once the book is in our hands.
I'd also just call into question the fact that it's not actually correct to say that Nettles was reportedly a dragon spawn. They actually never say that in The Princess and the Queen.
That's a fan theory, right?
Yeah, it is something that people surmise, but it's never explicitly stated. It's not even necessarily within the world, within the context of the story that people suspected that Nettles was a dragon seed. That's not said at all.
No, it's like circular. It's like
True.
It's like she rode the dragon, so she must be Targaryen, and she's Targaryen, so she was able to ride the dragon. Like, no, wait, maybe it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird test that who knows how many of the Targaryens were actually Targaryens, the dragon seeds that showed up, because if they're using the dragon, yeah, it's like you're saying, it's circular. It doesn't make much sense, although they did include that in the show with Drogon being super friendly to Jon.
Yeah, they did. The show went all in on the bloodline magic thing.
The blood detector dragon thing.
Yes.
There's also another point that I didn't really realize about these wild dragons, as they're known, that were on Dragonstone. So Balerion lived to be about 200 years old, but Cannibal was there on Dragonstone before the Targaryens arrived, and he died at around 129 AC, meaning Cannibal was about 250 years old, according to the post here. I haven't fact-checked these myself, but it also maybe feeds into the idea that, well, what we know, that the lives the Targaryens gave these dragons was not a nice one. They could have lived maybe much longer if they didn't have to fight each other and destroy kingdoms.
They could be half a millennium old if you left
They-
them alone for a while.
Yeah, they're like goldfish.
Go and have dialogue with the great turtle.
Or lobsters, maybe. But lobsters eventually die, I guess. Do you guys want to hear about lobsters?
Sure, tell us a lot. Go.
Lobsters don't technically die from like old age or their cells like
Hmm.
being super old. They just keep molting, and the thing is, they just get to a point where their shells get like so big and heavy that the molting process like exhausts them, and then they die out of like exhaustion or something from trying to molt from being like too swole.
So,
Yeah.
So they're like hard-shelled regenerating trolls?
Kinda.
Wow.
Until like they're just like, I'm too tired to do this in the middle of a molting thing. So
Turtles are kind of, like you said with the great and powerful turtle, they get to adulthood and then basically just don't age anymore.
Yeah.
I think it's the turtle of Darwin. I think his turtle is still alive, or it was until very recently. It's this weird thing with these very, very old animals where, like, for whatever reason, death by aging isn't really written into their code in the way that mammals are. Dragons may be the same way.
Oh, that's really interesting. Maybe we'll get more information about old dragons.
And actually, some of them escaped at the end of the dance. Like, I believe Sheep Stealer just sort of... That was Nettles' dragon, right?
Yeah.
And nobody knows what happened to it. It could still be out there.
Could
Could. It could have gone to Ashai if there are indeed still dragons there.
True.
I like the... I don't know how they would have died, but there's that enormous dragon skull close to Vase Tolero in the Red Waste. That could be Sheep Stealer. It could be any Dargan, to be honest, but whatever.
Actually, while we're on the subject, why don't we move to the next one, which has a lot to do with that.
Yeah.
It does. I really liked this theory. This is a thread from 2014, and it's about the world of ice and fire. And the thread title is "Burned Men Worshipped Nettles?" Question mark. I think it's a really fun theory. Bobetch,
No, do your best.
Bob points out that in the mountain clans of the Vale, the clan of the Burned Men worshipped a fire witch in the mountains. Sometime after the Dance of the Dragons, they sent their boys to bring her gifts and risk the flames of the dragon she commanded to prove their manhood. And so this user theorized that the fire witch could be Nettles, who was last seen flying Sheep Stealer into the morning mists of the Bay of Crabs. So she was flying toward the Vale, and what if she took refuge in the mountains, as the Burned Men legend might suggest? And the gifts could have been sheep for Sheep Stealer to eat. So what if we find out that Nettles was actually chilling with the Burned Men for the rest of her life with her dragon? And that was this like coda to the Dance of the Dragons.
It's a really interesting idea, and I mean, just based on that, it makes a lot of sense. Like, where did this dragon come from? Where did this fire witch come from? Yeah, she's a perfect candidate for that. There's not too many explicitly missing dragons. I think it's basically just Sheep Stealer at this point.
Yeah.
Among the dragons, and it would actually be like a very smart move to hide yourself in the mountains of the Vale. Nobody goes there.
Yeah.
Because why would you? Because the clans are vicious. And you could very easily just set yourself up as like a pseudo-goddess. Which may, if this is true, may tell us about how maybe the Valyrians interacted with the rest of the world. They set themselves up as gods and got people to worship them.
Okay. Well, when you've got a dragon.
Yeah, it's easy to.
It's a temptation.
It's something that I thought was interesting that came up in the Duncan Egg novellas. Egg is talking about how, his sisters are courting him, and Dunk is like, that's weird. But they always talk about how the Targaryens, even after they didn't have their dragons, were positioned as being like gods and therefore not subject to the same laws that the rest of Westeros had to follow. And again, even without dragons, many royals presented themselves this way in real history. Like, they were like, I'm the pharaoh because I'm descended from the line of gods. Duh. That's just how it was. But also, I just want to talk about how I was really struck by the fact that The Princess and the Queen came out 4 years ago, and that I upvoted this thread 4 years ago
Mm.
when it came out.
I do enjoy these things because you just randomly see these old threads. It's like, oh, I did like this one. Like that happened to me the other day with Crowfoot's daughter. She was showing me an old theory she wrote. And I'm like, oh, I saw this like 3 years ago. That's pretty cool.
The part about the Targaryens setting themselves up as gods, it actually reminded me of another thread by Birds. The user compares Targaryens and other characters from the series to characters in I, Claudius, about the Julio-Claudian Empire, the Julio-Claudian line of Roman emperors, right? And I mean, and this is the line of emperors that included Caligula, who actually thought he was a god, right? And it's obvious that George is familiar with that book and with those characters, and the thread lines up different characters. And I recommend reading the thread; it's really good. I wanted to say one other thing about the Nettles thread. I mean, this has come up in several of the Let's Discuss Fire and Blood threads, is that maybe some of these questions, maybe we're hoping not to get answers to them. And maybe it's fun to look for Nettles anywhere on the map she could turn up with her dragon. And instead of getting an answer to the question of, oh yeah, she's in a cave with the burned men, and that's canon and it's done. Like, what if it's not done? What if this ends up being one of the cool questions that we don't get an answer to?
I personally like those. It's definitely a personal preference more than it's necessarily like good storytelling. It's just me. Like, I like the idea of not knowing really what happened to her, and it's just like, oh, Nettles is just out there in the world living her best life, maybe, probably.
There's another character that has the same sort of thing happen to him at the end of the Dance of the Dragons. The Rogue Prince stabs Aemon One Eye, and they go down together with their dragons. They find Aemon One Eye still chained to his dragon, and they find Daemon's dragon. Whatever dragon he was riding, they find that one. But Daemon himself is never found. The fallout of the dance is very interesting in that way, as it's almost like there was like a mass migration at the end of it. If everyone was just like, okay, I'm done with war, get out. Maybe with Nettles, maybe with Daemon. There's actually some speculation that Daemon and Nettles, because they were supposedly lovers, ran off together in a like the Dark Knight Rises style end sequence where they're sitting at a restaurant drinking espresso and having a good time, and then Alfred walks up and it's like, Daemon, Nettles, what are you doing here?
And there's a speculation thread from 3 months ago by Flo Castle. What if Daemon escaped on Cannibal?
True.
Whoa.
It could be.
Could have been. That could be what happened.
And he's on Skagos.
Actually, isn't there talk of a dragon on Skagos?
There's one of everything on Skagos.
I think that's where people think Cannibal went. There's unicorns on Skagos. I think I agree with Eliana, though, just in general, that like I do hope at the end of Fire and Blood that we don't know the answers to every question, because then what would there be left to talk about? Some questions are better just for Maester Monthly discussions.
I think also unanswered questions, again, personal preference, makes things feel more realistic to me.
And it will give you something to ask George at some signing sometime.
I don't know, there are so many things to ask. Like, what are the other hours in the day that aren't the hour of the eel, or the hour of the ghost, or of the wolf? No one cares but me.
What are the names of the months? Do they have months?
No, fan fiction writers really want to know. It's important.
I need to know all the different hours.
Yes.
Days of the week, too.
How many days are in a Westerosi week?
Do they have days of the week? That's a great question.
I assume it's 7, because they count in years, don't they?
They count in normal years, but it would make sense for it to be 7, one day for each of the 7.
But what about before the 7 came to Westeros? They have days?
Oh, what is the calendar of the old gods compared to the calendar of the faith?
Ooh, good question. How do the children keep track of time? Probably moons.
Do calendars mean anything in a world that has long winters? Like,
I mean, George has answered this before, right? That they measure a year by a revolution, by the patterns of the stars, etc. And like, while there are patterns, etc., to be fair, there are areas of our world that don't have 4 seasons, and they don't have several different seasons.
But they still count a year.
Yes, because
Yeah.
they're following things like the moon or the stars.
I imagine the children and the first men went by the moon. The moon was very important to them.
That would make sense. Also, considering that the time that Bran spends in Bloodraven's cave is measured through the phases of the moon. And I don't think that that's necessarily a
yeah.
world building thing, but it is, of course, a way that one can use to tell time.
Actually, that just very randomly makes me wonder, how did they know how long the long night was? If they couldn't see the stars, presumably because of the endless winter, and they couldn't see the moon.
It just felt real long, okay?
That it's like mark little notches.
It was long AF. That was it. Instead of AC and BC, it was AF.
Do we know from World of Ice and Fire where the long winters fall during the Targaryen dynasty? It didn't even occur to me that like, are we going to get any long winters in Fire and Blood?
Yes, there definitely were long winters during Targaryen dynasties. One of them was, I think it was right around the time of the plague.
The year of the false spring.
Right?
Yeah,
A false spring means there was a winter.
a long winter.
And that's living memory to the Dunk and Egg era, right?
Yes. There was another one during that other plague, during the Dunk and Egg era, the one where Bloodraven had to burn everything. I think there was a winter during that time.
I wonder if there was a winter during the reign of Jaehaerys. I wonder how they handled it.
Probably. There has to
It must have been.
What would Septon Barth do?
there had to have been one at least less than every 15 years, because they talk about how Robb Stark and them, etc., are
Oh, you're right,
sweet summer
you're
children.
right.
Well, actually, we don't know that Robb and Jon haven't lived through a winter, but we at least know that Bran has never lived through a winter, so that gives us 7 years at the very least since the last winter.
Yeah.
I don't think Sansa's seen one, so then that gives us 11.
Has Tyrion seen one?
Yes, Tyrion has.
I
Short
think
ones,
so.
though. Short winters.
Yeah.
But still, short in terms of they were, a year or two long.
Yeah, so,
That's pretty long.
Ned and a lot of the adults have seen a winter. They don't really talk about it.
No.
I think because thematically the winter for everyone was really Robert's Rebellion in their hearts. But
Ooh.
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if there's been one for Robb and Jon, but we know that they occur at least less than every 11 years, because people keep talking about how this is an exceptionally long summer.
Yeah, the long summer is ending.
They're more
Yeah.
frequent than in 11-year time spans.
But you, dear listener, you probably have the book in your hand right now and know when the long winters
Wow.
fell during the first 130 years of the Targaryen dynasty. And you can probably drop a comment in our threads here and
You can look it up.
tell us how you think the Targaryens did handling those long winters.
That's true. I do have a vague recollection that there were times in Targaryen history where wars were basically averted because they're winter is about to set in, so there definitely was one instance I can remember where somebody launched a war during a winter thinking nobody would be prepared. It didn't go super well. So, that is our discussion on Fire and Blood. Well, all three of us will be there. We'll be able to see the Gurm himself have Fire and Blood in our hot little hands. And everyone else, you can pick up your Fire and Blood copies on November 20th. Hopefully you already pre-ordered and have it on your way to yourself, because this is going to be a lit book. It's going to be fire. Anyway, that's it for us today. You can find us on Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, and YouTube. All our episodes are archived at our WordPress, maestermonthly.wordpress.com. We are on social media at Maester Monthly on Facebook and Twitter, where you can and should and legally must smash that MF and like button. If you'd like to suggest an intro question or a subreddit highlight, feel free to PM the mod team on the subreddit, reddit.com/aswaf. You can just spell that one out.
Reddit.com/r/aswaf.
And if you've got the time or inclination, please go to iTunes and review the podcast. That is one of the primary ways that helps people find us. And if you leave an awesome comment, it'll get read probably on the next Maester Monthly. We always read all the YouTube comments and iTunes reviews. Whew! So, I have been Matt, also known as JoeMagician.
And I've been Eliana, also known as Glass Table Girl.
And I have been Isabel, also known as Mighty Isabel.
Thank you all for listening. Look forward to seeing you all on the subreddit as we discuss the many, many revelations and awesome things coming out of Fire and Blood, and presumably Wins a Winner, coming out November 20th.
No.
It's coming out on November 20th. Wins a Winner. It's confirmed. It's happening.
Woo.